The year was 1884, and I was just 10 years old, a scrawny boy named Antoine, with eyes far too big for my face and an insatiable curiosity that often got me into trouble. My father, a stern but fair man, owned a small boulangerie on a cobbled street not far from the Seine, its warm, yeasty scent a constant comfort in the bustling heart of Paris. But even the comforting smell of fresh bread couldn't erase the whispers that had begun to circulate through our quarter, whispers about a new hotel, grand and foreboding, that had risen from the ashes of an old, forgotten manor on Rue des Spectres. They called it, ominously, the Hotel of Shadows. It wasn't a name bestowed by its proprietors, mind you, but by the street urchins and market vendors, the laundresses, and the weary cab drivers who traversed the city's labyrinthine alleys. They spoke of its perpetually shrouded facade, always seeming to be caught in the lingering twilight, even at noon. Its windows, tall and narrow, were like vacant eyes staring out onto the street, reflecting nothing but the oppressive grey of the Parisian sky. I'd ridden past it on occasion, perched precariously on the back of Monsieur Dubois' delivery cart, clutching a basket of my father's brioche. Each time, a shiver would trace its way down my spine, a sensation not entirely of fear, but of an odd, magnetic pull. It was a place that felt both ancient and brand new, as if it had always been there, yet had only just decided to reveal itself. The strangest thing, however, wasn't its architectural gloom or its unsettling presence. No, the truly peculiar aspect, the detail that began to unravel the polite facade of Parisian indifference, was the luggage. Or rather, the lack of it. Not that the hotel lacked luggage, quite the opposite. Every single guest, without fail, left behind their bags. Trunks, valises, hat boxes, all remained within the Hotel of Shadows after their owners had departed. At first, it was merely a curious anecdote, something to chuckle about over a morning coffee. Perhaps forgetful aristocrats, they reasoned, too absorbed in their grand affairs to recall such mundane items. But then, the anecdotes grew in number, became a pattern, and then, slowly, a chilling mystery. My father, pragmatic as ever, dismissed it as a clever marketing ploy, a way to generate buzz. Nonsense, Antoine, he'd scoff, wiping flour from his brow with the back of his hand. They probably store it for a fee, or the guests send for it later. But even he, in quieter moments, would frown, his gaze drifting towards the window as if he could see the spectral hotel from our bakery. It wasn't long before the official notices appeared, discreetly posted on lamp-posts and in the windows of shops. Lost property, inquiries for the Hotel de Ambers. But no one ever seemed to inquire. No one ever claimed their forgotten belongings. I started keeping a tally in my head. Whenever Monsieur Dupont, the elderly concierge of our building, received a new piece of gossip, I'd add it to my mental ledger. There was the Austrian Baron, who checked in with 3 enormous trunks, emblazoned with his family crest. He stayed for a week, left with only the clothes on his back, and his trunks remained. Then there was the American heiress, famous for her eccentricities, who arrived with a dozen hat boxes, each said to contain a different exotic bird feather. She left, hat boxes full of feathers intact. The stories piled up, each more bizarre than the last, until the tally in my mind grew to an astonishing, unsettling number. What truly fueled my morbid fascination, though, was not just the luggage itself, but the nature of the guests. They were not your typical tourists, passing through Paris on a grand tour. These were people who seemed to arrive out of thin air, often late at night, in hansom cabs that would materialize from the shadows and disappear just as quickly. They were a curious mix, a renowned opera singer with a voice that could shatter glass, a reclusive inventor whispered to be working on a perpetual motion machine, a celebrated philosopher whose theories were as labyrinthine as the city's sewers, even a notorious gambler from London, his face etched with the weariness of 1,000 card games. Each one, famous or infamous, arrived with a story, a reputation, and always, their luggage. And each one departed, leaving it all behind. I began to cycle past the hotel on my own, on my way to deliver fresh croissants to the grand houses near the Bois de Boulogne. I'd slow down, my bicycle tires crunching on the gravel, and peer through the wrought iron gates. The hotel stood like a silent sentinel, its dark stone facade absorbing the sunlight rather than reflecting it. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement inside the windows, a fleeting shadow, a curtain twitching. But never a clear view, never a definitive answer. The main entrance, a massive oak door adorned with a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a gargoyle, seemed to breathe a sigh of ancient secrets. One afternoon, spurred by a dare from my friend Marcel, who was 2 years my senior and possessed a bravado I often envied, I dared to dismount my bicycle and approach the gates. The air immediately felt heavier, cooler, as if the hotel itself exhaled a perpetual sigh. The intricate ironwork was cold beneath my fingertips. I pressed my face against the bars, trying to see beyond the overgrown shrubbery that hemmed in the path. A gravel driveway, neatly raked, led to the imposing front steps. On either side, 2 enormous stone lions, their eyes hollowed by time, seemed to guard the secrets within. A sudden gust of wind, though the day was otherwise still, rustled the leaves of the ancient plane trees lining the street, creating a low, mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the hotel itself. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum beat against the silence. It was then that I saw it, something I hadn't noticed before, something that sent a prickle of unease through my scalp. Tucked beneath the shadows of a particularly gnarled rose bush, near the edge of the driveway, was a small, ornate leather case. It wasn't a trunk or a valise, it was more like a jewel box, exquisitely crafted, with intricate silver filigree. And it was clearly not meant to be outdoors. It lay there, half hidden, as if someone had dropped it in haste, or perhaps, as if it had been deliberately placed there, a silent testament to the hotel's peculiar habit. My first instinct was to reach through the bars and grab it, to inspect its contents. But something held me back. A cold certainty, a premonition that touching it would pull me deeper into a mystery I was not ready to comprehend. Besides, it felt wrong, like disturbing a slumbering beast. I stared at it for a long moment, the small box pulsating with an unspoken story. The sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops, casting long, dramatic shadows across the street. The Hotel of Shadows lived up to its name, its form dissolving into the encroaching gloom. The small, ornate case beneath the rose bush seemed to wink at me, a silent invitation or a warning. I knew then that this wasn't just a quirky hotel with forgetful patrons. There was something profoundly unsettling about the Hotel of Shadows, something that extended far beyond misplaced belongings. And a terrible, thrilling curiosity had begun to take root in my young heart, urging me to uncover the truth behind every guest who left, and every piece of luggage they left behind. I cycled away, the image of the silver filigreed box burned into my mind, a harbinger of the strange journey I was about to embark upon. The bakery, and its comforting smells, seemed very far away indeed. That night, the aroma of my mother's pot au feu, usually so comforting, tasted like ash in my mouth. The silver filigreed case lay heavy on my mind, a silent weight pressing down on my thoughts. I tried to focus on my homework, scribbling numbers in my arithmetic book, but the ornate patterns of the box replaced the sums in my vision. My father's easy dismissal of the hotel's oddity now seemed naive, almost foolish. He couldn't have seen the way that small case glinted in the fading light, an undeniable signal that something was amiss. It wasn't just forgotten, it felt abandoned. The next morning, instead of heading straight for the deliveries, I detoured, cycling past Rue des Spectres. The hotel stood as before, impassive, its dark facade absorbing the early morning light. The rose bush rustled gently in the breeze, but the small case was gone. My heart lurched, a strange mix of disappointment and relief. Someone had retrieved it? Or perhaps, it had never truly been there at all, merely a trick of the deepening twilight and my overactive imagination. Yet, the memory felt too vivid, too real. The cold iron of the gate, the sudden chill in the air, the distinct filigree. No, it had been real. And now its absence deepened the mystery, confirming that the Hotel of Shadows was not merely a place of peculiar habits, but one where things vanished as inexplicably as they appeared. My fascination, once a simmering ember, now ignited into a small, persistent flame. I started making the Hotel of Shadows part of my daily routine. After school, instead of playing marbles with Marcel or chasing pigeons in the square, I would cycle to Rue des Spectres. I'd position myself across the street, behind the broad trunk of a chestnut tree, and watch. I learned the rhythm of the street, the cabbies clattering past, the flower seller pushing her cart, the occasional gendarme on his beat. But the hotel itself remained an anomaly, aloof and silent. I saw guests arrive, as the whispers described. A grand carriage would draw up, its horses snorting plumes of vapor into the cool air. Out would step a figure, usually cloaked and seemingly weary, followed by a footman struggling under the weight of several lavish trunks. The entrance, that gargoyle knocker door, would open, swallow them whole, and then close with a soft thud that resonated with a finality. They never seemed to linger outside, never looked back at the city they had just entered. It was as if they were stepping into another world, completely detached from the Paris I knew. And then, I saw them leave. This was even stranger. There was no grand carriage, no footman. The same door would open, and the guest would emerge, often looking remarkably different from their arrival. Sometimes, they appeared lighter, almost ethereal, their faces strangely calm, devoid of the previous weariness. Other times, they seemed heavier, their eyes holding a deep, unreadable sadness. But always, they left alone, and with nothing but the clothes on their back. No hat, no cane, no gloves, and certainly, no luggage. It was as if they had shed their worldly possessions like a snake shedding its skin. One crisp autumn afternoon, a thin, stooped man, a famed entomologist rumored to possess the largest collection of rare butterflies in Europe, arrived. His valise, I noted, was old and worn, covered in travel stickers from exotic lands. It seemed too small for the man's reputation, yet he guarded it with an almost desperate grip. He entered the hotel, and for 3 days, I saw no sign of him. Then, on the 4th morning, just as the city was waking, the main door creaked open. The entomologist emerged, but he wasn't stooped any longer. He stood straighter, almost taller, and his eyes, once sharp and focused, now held a distant, unfathomable quality, like pools reflecting the far-off stars. He didn't even glance back at the magnificent, shadowy building as he walked slowly down the steps and disappeared into the labyrinth of Parisian streets, his hands empty. His worn valise, I was certain, remained inside. I confided in Marcel, Of course. He listened, his eyes wide, his usual bravado tempered by a flicker of genuine apprehension. "It's a trick, Antoine," he insisted, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Perhaps they have another entrance, a secret one, where they retrieve their belongings." But even as he said it, he knew it didn't fit. The official notices, the lack of inquiries, it all pointed to something far more unusual. Marcel, however, was not one to be easily deterred from a good mystery. "We must investigate," he declared one evening, his eyes gleaming with youthful daring. "We must get inside." My blood ran cold. Inside? Are you mad, Marcel? My father would skin me alive. "Don't be a coward, Antoine," he scoffed, though his own knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the bakery counter. "Think of the stories. Imagine what they keep inside that place. All those trunks, all those secrets." His words lodged themselves in my mind. Secrets. The Hotel of Shadows pulsed with them, a silent, dark heart beating at the edge of my world. The idea of entering the hotel, of walking through that gargoyle-adorned door, filled me with a terror that was almost intoxicating. It was forbidden, dangerous, entirely against everything my sensible father had taught me. But the image of the jewel box, the opera singer's voice, the entomologist's strange departure, they beckoned me, whispering promises of answers. We formulated a plan, a foolish, childish plan born of ignorance and boundless curiosity. We would wait for a night when the moon was thin and the clouds were heavy, when the street was quiet and the gendarme's patrol was elsewhere. We would approach the back of the hotel, where Marcel claimed there was a service entrance used by delivery men. His cousin, who worked for a laundry service, had once mentioned it in passing. It was flimsy, reckless, and utterly captivating to my 10-year-old mind. The waiting was the hardest part. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every creak of the bakery floorboards sounded like a ghostly whisper. I found myself jumping at sudden noises, my senses heightened by the anticipation and dread. My mother noticed my distraction. "Antoine, are you well, mon petit? You seem distant." I mumbled something about homework, but her gaze lingered, observant. Finally, the night came. The sky was a vast, inky canvas, dotted with only a few faint stars. A chill wind, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, swept through the streets. Marcel met me behind the bakery, a small, battered lantern clutched in his hand. His face, usually so full of carefree mischief, was pale, but his eyes still held that spark of daring. "Ready, Antoine," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This wasn't just observing from a distance anymore. This was an invasion. A direct confrontation with the mystery that had consumed my thoughts. But there was no turning back. The lure of the unknown, the whispers of those abandoned belongings, pulled me forward with an irresistible force. I nodded, a silent agreement to plunge deeper into the shadows, to uncover the truth behind the Hotel of Shadows, and the unsettling riddle of every guest who left, abandoning their silent, storied luggage. We crept through the quiet streets, two small figures swallowed by the vast, indifferent city, drawn by a darkness we barely understood. The cobbled streets echoed with our hushed footsteps as Marcel and I moved like shadows ourselves, clinging to the deepest parts of the alleys. The chill in the air intensified with every block, and the distant sounds of Paris, a carriage wheel, a dog's bark, a lone singer's melancholy tune, seemed muffled, as if the city itself held its breath. Marcel, for all his bravado, kept glancing over his shoulder, his grip on the sputtering lantern tightening. Its weak glow barely cut through the oppressive darkness, making the familiar street seem alien and foreboding. We spoke in whispers, our breath clouding in the cold, each word an anxious puff of white smoke into the gloom. "Are you sure about this, Marcel?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "Don't be a goose, Antoine," he muttered back, though his own bravado seemed to be wearing thin. "We're almost there. Just around this corner." And there it was. Not the grand, imposing front of the Hotel of Shadows, but its rear, a wall of unadorned, soot-stained stone, punctuated by a few grimy, barred windows. It looked less like a hotel and more like a forgotten prison. The air here was heavy with a stale, damp smell, a mix of old stone, stagnant water from a nearby drain, and something else, something I couldn't quite place, but that sent a prickle of unease up my neck. A low, persistent hum seemed to emanate from the building, a sound so subtle I wondered if I was imagining it. "The service entrance," Marcel pointed with his chin, his eyes darting. It was a smaller, less ornate door than the main one, set into a recessed archway, almost invisible against the dark stone. Its wood was splintered and grey with age, and the iron hinges looked rusted solid. My cousin said it's usually locked, but sometimes the delivery men are careless. Hope, a tiny, flickering spark, ignited within me. Careless. That was our chance. We approached cautiously, each step taken with meticulous care, as if the very ground beneath us might betray our presence. The hum from the hotel grew faintly louder, a low thrum that vibrated in my teeth. It was an odd sound, not mechanical, not like a furnace, but something deeper, more resonant. Marcel reached the door first, his lantern held high, casting dancing shadows. He pushed, gently at first, then with more force. The door didn't budge. My heart sank. "It's locked," I whispered, relief and disappointment warring within me. "Wait," Marcel said, his brow furrowed in concentration. He ran his hand over the door frame, then knelt, examining the bottom edge. "Look here, Antoine. The wood is warped." He pointed to a small gap, almost imperceptible, between the bottom of the door and the stone threshold. "Maybe a good shove, right here." He braced himself, pushing against the warped wood with his shoulder. I joined him, adding my meager weight. We pushed, grunting with effort. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a low groan that sounded like the building itself was sighing, the door gave way, not swinging open, but sliding inwards a few inches, scraping against the stone floor. A breath of cold, stale air wafted out, carrying with it that peculiar, unidentifiable smell, now stronger, vaguely metallic and sweet. Marcel gasped, pulling back slightly. "It worked," he whispered triumphantly, his face alight with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The gap was just wide enough for us to squeeze through, one at a time. Marcel, being older and bolder, went first. He wedged himself sideways, his lantern held aloft, and then, with a final heave, disappeared into the darkness. "It's clear," his voice echoed, sounding strangely hollow. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The gap looked even smaller from my perspective, a sliver of darkness leading into the unknown. I squeezed through, scraping my jacket against the rough stone. The air inside was colder, heavier, and the low hum was now a distinct, palpable vibration, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to fill the very bones of the building. We found ourselves in a narrow, unlit corridor, lined with wooden crates and dusty tarpaulins. The faint light from Marcel's lantern barely pierced the gloom, making the shadows writhe and dance around us like hungry spirits. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic thrum that resonated from the walls. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard, a constant, low murmur that was both unsettling and oddly hypnotic. "Where are we?" I whispered, my voice barely a squeak. "Looks like a storage area," Marcel replied, his voice still hushed, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He picked up a discarded sack and cautiously pulled back a corner of a tarpaulin. Beneath it lay stacks of boxes, their labels faded and unreadable in the dim light. The laundry cousin was right. This is where deliveries come in. We crept further into the hotel's interior, moving like ghosts. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of our clothing, sounded deafening in the profound quiet. The corridor eventually opened into a larger space, a vast, echoing chamber that smelled faintly of old leather and dust. My eyes widened. This was it. The luggage. Row upon row of trunks, valises, and hat boxes were stacked meticulously, stretching into the unseen darkness. They varied wildly in size, shape, and material, gleaming brass-bound trunks, worn leather cases, brightly colored hat boxes, canvas sacks. Each one silent, each one a testament to a journey ended, an owner vanished. The sheer volume was staggering, far more than I had ever imagined. It was a museum of abandoned lives, a silent archive of forgotten possessions. Marcel lifted his lantern higher, and the beam swept across the labels. Some were blank, others bore illegible scrawls. But some were clear: Baron von Richter, Vienna. Mademoiselle Dubois, Paris Opera. Professor Alastair Finch, London. The names, once mere whispers in the baker's shop, now stood before me, tangible proof of the hotel's strange allure. The metallic sweet smell was stronger here, almost cloying, and the low hum throbbed with a deeper intensity, seeming to emanate from the very floor beneath our feet. I touched a large, leather-bound trunk. It was cold, oddly cold, despite the general stuffiness of the room. A strange sensation, like a faint tremor, passed through my fingertips. "Look!" Marcel exclaimed, his voice a sharp whisper that cut through the silence. He was pointing towards the center of the vast chamber. There, nestled amongst the towering stacks of luggage, was a peculiar structure. It was a circular, raised platform, made of polished dark wood, with intricate carvings that snaked across its surface. In its center, something shimmered faintly. We approached it slowly, cautiously, our eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and awe. The hum was deafening here, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to fill my entire body. On the platform, standing upright as if waiting for its owner, was a single, exquisitely carved wooden chest, unlike any other piece of luggage in the room. It glowed with a soft, internal light, a pale, ethereal luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with the hum. As we got closer, I saw that the carvings on the wooden platform weren't merely decorative. They were symbols, ancient and unsettling, spiraling inwards towards the glowing chest. And the light within the chest wasn't a steady glow, it was a swirling, almost liquid luminescence, shifting through shades of blue and silver. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. Marcel, usually so quick to speak, was silent, his jaw slack. He stared at the glowing chest, mesmerized. What is that?" he finally breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Just then, a faint, high-pitched whirring sound joined the deep hum, coming from the glowing chest itself. The light within it intensified, casting stark shadows around the chamber. The ancient symbols on the platform seemed to throb with a deeper, richer glow. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and the air crackled with an almost tangible energy. It felt as if the very fabric of reality was stretching thin, taut as a violin string. We stumbled back, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of energy. The small, battered lantern slipped from Marcel's trembling hand, clattering to the floor. Its flame sputtered and died, plunging the chamber into utter darkness, save for the pulsating, ethereal glow of the strange wooden chest. The hum intensified, filling the void left by the light, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through every bone in my body, a sound that seemed to call out to something ancient and profound. We were no longer just two boys exploring a forbidden hotel, we were adrift in a mystery far grander and more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. The sudden, absolute darkness was a physical blow, more disorienting than the hum that now throbbed relentlessly through the vast chamber. Marcel gasped beside me, a small, choked sound. The faint, high-pitched whirring from the glowing chest intensified, a sound like 1,000 tiny insects buzzing, yet deep and resonant. The only light in the cavernous room was the eerie, liquid luminescence emanating from the strange wooden chest, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced on the stacks of abandoned luggage, making them seem like silent, watchful giants. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest, beating a desperate rhythm against my ribs. "Marcel!" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the hum, my hand blindly reaching out for him in the suffocating blackness. My fingers brushed against his arm, clammy and trembling. "Antoine," he breathed, his voice tight with fear. "What is that thing?" The glowing chest pulsed with a frantic rhythm, its light shifting from pale blue to an almost blinding silver. The ancient symbols carved into the wooden platform beneath it seemed to come alive, glowing with the same eerie light, as if infused with a powerful, unseen force. The metallic sweet smell in the air grew stronger, almost intoxicating, and a strange pressure built in my ears, making them pop. It felt like standing at the bottom of a deep well, the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. Then, the high-pitched whirring reached a crescendo, a piercing sound that seemed to bore directly into my skull. The wooden chest began to lift. Slowly, majestically, it rose from the platform, levitating a few inches above the carved wood, spinning gently on its axis. The swirling light within it intensified, spilling out onto the surrounding luggage, illuminating the countless names on the tags: Baron von Richter, Mademoiselle Dubois, Professor Alistair Finch. Each name seemed to hum with the same resonant energy. A low, guttural groan echoed through the chamber, seemingly coming from the very walls themselves. It wasn't a sound of pain, but of immense, ancient power being awakened. Dust, disturbed by the unseen vibrations, rained down from the high ceiling, shimmering like silver motes in the chest's ethereal glow. Marcel pulled me closer, our shoulders pressed together, two small figures dwarfed by the enormity of the hotel's hidden secret. As the chest continued to rotate, the swirling light within it began to coalesce, forming vague, shifting shapes. I squinted, trying to make sense of the amorphous forms. They seemed to be swirling currents, like water or smoke, but imbued with light. And then, with a jolt that sent a tremor through my entire body, I realized what they were. They were faces. Flickering, indistinct, but undeniably human faces, caught within the luminous currents, swirling and dissolving, only to reform again. They were the faces of the hotel's guests. I recognized the sharp features of the Austrian baron, the delicate profile of the opera singer, the kind, weary eyes of the entomologist. They weren't solid, not truly there, but their essences, their memories, were suspended within that glowing, alien light. It was as if the chest was a receptacle, not for their physical luggage, but for something far more profound, their very selves, or perhaps, the echoes of their experiences, their journeys. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my initial awe. This wasn't just strange, it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. What had happened to these people? What was this hotel, truly? Was it a place where people shed their lives, leaving them behind like unwanted baggage, and then simply departed? Or was something more sinister at play? The cloying smell intensified, now carrying a hint of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the chamber, making us jump. The ethereal glow from the chest flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish itself. The high-pitched whirring changed, becoming a ragged, sputtering sound, like a dying machine. The ground beneath our feet shuddered violently. What was that? Marcel cried, his voice laced with pure terror. From the unseen depths of the chamber, from beyond the towering stacks of luggage, a new sound emerged, heavy, lumbering footsteps, accompanied by a guttural growl that reverberated through the very stones. It was a sound of immense weight, of something large and powerful moving through the darkness. The metallic sweet scent turned acrid, like burnt sugar. The pulsating light of the chest dimmed, then brightened erratically, casting wild, disorienting flashes that momentarily illuminated glimpses of our surroundings. In one such flash, I saw it. A monstrous silhouette, massive and hulking, emerging from behind a wall of trunks. It was indistinct, a formless mass of shadow, but its presence was undeniable, filling the vast space with a terrifying gravity. It seemed to have no discernible features, just a vast, undulating form, a creature of pure darkness, drawn to the light of the chest. The hum from the building suddenly ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the previous noise, a vacuum of sound that pressed in on us. Only the sputtering whirring of the chest and the heavy, deliberate thud of the creature's footsteps remained. The glowing chest began to descend, slowly at first, then rapidly, crashing back onto the carved platform with a sickening thud that shook the entire room. The light within it flickered, then died, plunging us once more into absolute, impenetrable darkness. "Run, Antoine! Run!" Marcel's voice was a desperate, panicked shriek. He pulled me, blindly, towards where we thought the service entrance was. My legs felt like lead, my mind reeling from the sudden sensory overload. The metallic sweet scent was now mixed with something else, something fetid and ancient, like earth disturbed from a forgotten grave. We stumbled through the darkness, our hands outstretched, colliding with stacks of trunks, sending them toppling with a deafening crash. The sound of our desperate flight, and the echoing boom of the falling luggage, must have alerted the creature. Its growl intensified, closer now, a low, predatory rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I could hear its heavy breathing, a raspy, moist sound that filled the air around us. Panic lent us a strange strength. We scrambled over fallen cases, our movements clumsy but driven by a primal need to escape. The service entrance, a faint outline of gray against the black, finally appeared before us. Marcel fumbled with the warped door, pushing against it with all his might. It groaned, refusing to open quickly. Behind us, the growl turned into a roar, a truly terrifying sound that shook the very foundations of the hotel. I felt a gust of hot, foul-smelling air on my neck. The creature was right behind us. I could almost feel its presence, a vast, Suffocating darkness. Push, Marcel, push. I screamed, adding my weight to his. With a final, desperate shove, the door scraped open just enough. Marcel squeezed through first, tumbling out into the night. I followed immediately, pulling my slight frame through the narrow opening, gasping for breath as the cold, fresh air hit my face. As I emerged, I glanced back, a single, fleeting glimpse into the black maw of the hotel. In the instant before the door slammed shut with a final, echoing clang, I saw nothing but an impenetrable void. No creature, no glowing chest, just the darkness. We didn't stop running until we reached the main street, our lungs burning, our legs aching. We collapsed against a lamp post, gasping, shaking, our faces pale with terror. The comforting sounds of the city, once muffled, now rushed back, loud and vibrant, a stark contrast to the deathly silence we had just escaped. The Hotel of Shadows stood behind us, a dark, silent sentinel, betraying nothing of the monstrous secrets it held within. We had gone looking for answers about abandoned luggage, and instead, we had stumbled upon something far more ancient, far more terrifying, something that pulsed with the very essence of forgotten lives and a monstrous guardian of untold secrets. We had barely escaped, and the image of those swirling faces, and the hulking darkness, was burned into my mind, a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The chilling memory of that night, of the monstrous shadow and the strange, pulsing chest, etched itself into the very fabric of my being. Marcel and I, panting and shaking, huddled beneath the flickering gaslight of a street lamp, its yellow glow doing little to dispel the darkness that clung to us like a shroud. Every shadow seemed to twist into the form of the creature, every distant rumble of a carriage wheel sounded like its lumbering footsteps. We didn't speak for a long time, the shared terror too profound for words. My limbs ached, not just from the running, but from the raw, visceral fear that had coursed through me. The smell, that metallic sweet, fetid odor, lingered in my nostrils, a sickening reminder of the unspeakable things we had witnessed. When we finally found our voices, they were hoarse whispers. "Antoine," Marcel croaked, his eyes wide and bloodshot, "we have to tell someone." My mind raced. Tell whom? My father? He would dismiss it as a childish nightmare, perhaps even scold us for venturing out so late. The gendarmes. They would laugh us out of the station. Who would believe two small boys rambling about a levitating, glowing chest filled with spectral faces, and a hulking, shadowy beast guarding it? It sounded like the fevered imaginings of a madman, not a true account of a Paris night. No, I whispered, shaking my head vehemently. They wouldn't believe us. They'd think we were making it up. Or worse, that we were playing some dangerous game. The thought of confessing the truth, of articulating the horror we had experienced, felt impossible, too fragile to survive the scrutiny of adult reason. The secret was too big, too bizarre. It belonged to us, two boys who had inadvertently stumbled upon a truth the world was not ready for. Marcel nodded slowly, the initial surge of panic giving way to a grim understanding. He knew, as I did, the futility of our pleas. So, what do we do? That question hung in the cold night air, heavy and unanswered. We didn't have a plan. We just had the terror, the lingering fear, and the unshakable certainty that the Hotel of Shadows was far more than anyone knew. It was a place where lives, or at least the essence of them, were stored, and something ancient and terrible guarded those forgotten pieces. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and distracted days. Sleep offered no respite, merely plunging me back into the dark chamber, the pulsating light, and the encroaching shadow. I saw the faces swirling in the chest, heard the creature's guttural growl, felt the hot breath on my neck. During the day, the comforting routine of the boulangerie felt strangely distant, as if I were observing my own life from afar. The scent of warm bread, once my sanctuary, now felt insufficient to ward off the chill that had settled deep within me. Marcel and I avoided Rue specters. The very thought of cycling past that imposing facade filled me with a fresh wave of dread. But avoiding it didn't make it disappear. The whispers about the Hotel of Shadows continued, though they were now tinged with a new, unspoken unease. People still talked about the forgotten luggage, but their voices were lower, their expressions more guarded. It was as if the city itself sensed the growing malevolence radiating from that dark corner of Paris. Our escape had been a close call, a terrifying brush with the unknown. Yet, despite the fear, a persistent thread of curiosity remained, a nagging urge to understand. What was that chest? Why were the faces of the guests inside it? And the creature, what was its purpose? Was it merely a guardian, or something more? The questions gnawed at me, refusing to be silenced. My mind, young and impressionable, struggled to reconcile the mundane reality of my life with the supernatural horror we had encountered. One afternoon, weeks after our fateful expedition, I was helping my father deliver a large order of pastries to a grand townhouse on the outskirts of the city. As we passed a quiet, tree-lined square, I saw him. The famous philosopher, whose theories were as labyrinthine as the city sewers, the man whose luggage, filled with leather-bound tomes, I had seen stacked within the Hotel of Shadows. He was sitting on a bench, gazing absently at the pigeons pecking at crumbs. He looked different. Not dramatically so, but subtly. His usually sharp, intelligent eyes, once alight with intellectual fire, now seemed dull, unfocused, as if the light within them had dimmed. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated. He looked empty. The word resonated with a chilling clarity. Empty, like a vessel from which something vital had been drained. He had left his luggage, and perhaps, something more. My father, noticing my prolonged stare, nudged me. "Antoine, what is it?" "Nothing, Papa," I mumbled, tearing my gaze away. But the image of the philosopher, once so vibrant, now so muted, solidified my terrifying hypothesis. The Hotel of Shadows didn't just keep their luggage. It kept something of them. Their vibrancy, their passions, their very essence. The swirling faces in the chest were not merely echoes, they were fragments, remnants of what the guests had left behind. The realization sent a fresh wave of horror through me, far deeper than the initial fear of the creature. This wasn't just a monster. This was a theft of the soul, a gradual consumption. The guests were not simply departing, forgetful of their belongings. They were leaving a part of themselves behind, willingly or unwillingly, within the walls of that dark hotel. And the glowing chest, the source of that strange hum, was the instrument of that insidious exchange. I thought of the Austrian baron, the opera singer, the entomologist. They had all seemed changed upon their departure. Lighter, or heavier, but always, always different. Their luggage, those tangible symbols of their lives, were left behind as a macabre trophy, a grim monument to what they had lost. The urge to go back, to understand, to somehow reverse this terrible process, began to war with the deep-seated terror. It was a foolish, reckless impulse, I knew, but it was powerful. The Hotel of Shadows was not just a curiosity anymore, it was a hungry maw, silently consuming the vitality of Paris's most extraordinary individuals. and I, a simple baker's boy, had seen its inner workings. I began to research, discreetly. I spent hours in the dusty corners of the local library, poring over old maps and historical texts. I learned that the manor upon which the Hotel of Shadows stood had a dark history, whispered tales of strange rituals and disappearances dating back centuries. It was said to have been built on a confluence of ley lines, ancient currents of energy that crisscrossed the earth. This gave me pause. Could the the glowing chest, the creature, be tied to these ancient energies? The thought was dizzying, overwhelming. A child's mind grappling with forces far beyond his comprehension. But the evidence, circumstantial as it was, began to coalesce into a terrifying narrative. The hotel wasn't merely a building, it was a conduit, a siphon. And the luggage? The luggage was merely a symbolic representation, a placeholder for the more profound, intangible things that were being taken. The creature, then, was not just a guardian of the luggage, but a guardian of the process. It protected the chest, the place where these essences were collected. Its roar, its vast, shadowy form, was a warning, a deterrent to anyone who might try to interfere with the hotel's terrible purpose. I knew, with a certainty that settled cold in my bones, that I could not simply let this stand. Marcel, for all his fear, understood too. He saw the same haunted look in my eyes, the same desperate need for answers. We had seen too much to simply forget. We had to do something. But what could two boys, armed with nothing but a bruised lantern and a terrifying secret, do against a hotel that consumed souls and a monster that guarded them? The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, but for the first time, the morbid curiosity that had once propelled me was replaced by a grim determination. The Hotel of Shadows held a truth that Paris needed to uncover, and somehow, I, Antoine, was inextricably bound to its terrifying secret.